She had a voice that sounded older than her years, raw, aching, honest. A sound that stitched together jazz, soul, and raw British street poetry, and then set the world singing along. But Amy Winehouse's story was never only about music. It was about a rise so fast it burned her, relationships that bled into her art, and an addiction that pulled her towards a death the world would mourn. This is the life of Amy Winehouse, the genius, the headlines, and the human being behind the beehive. Amy Jade Winehouse was born on 14th September 1983 in Southgate, North London, a child of a working-class family with a love for music stitched into their home. Her father Mitch drove a taxi and did odd jobs. Her mother Janice worked as a pharmacist. They were a Jewish family in suburban North London, and young Amy grew up on a steady diet of jazz records her family adored. She sang early and sang often, and by her teens she was already a fixture on Camden's music circuit, a place that would later become inseparable from her name. Teachers, friends, and early managers would quickly recognize a voice and presence that didn't sound like anything in the UK at the time. Amy's first band, or more accurately, her early consortium of musicians, found her a stage in clubs where she performed jazz standards and originals that hinted at a future not yet fully formed but unmistakable. It was the small clubs where she learned phrasing, aroma, and the intimacy between singer and listener. In 2003, Amy released her debut album, Frank. It was a record steeped in jazz awareness and literate songwriting, a coming of age that critics loved, though mainstream success was still a few years away. Frank showed a young artist who wrote like she lived 3 lifetimes. It announced her as a gifted songwriter and placed her on the map. But Frank wasn't the global tidal wave that Back to Black would become. What Frank did accomplish was, it gave Amy a foundation, a fan base, industry attention, and the confidence to push her voice into a more modern, personal territory. Amy's breakthrough sound didn't appear in a vacuum. It came from collaboration. Working with producers like Mark Ronson and the Dap Kings brought her neo-soul warmth and retro textures. Working with musicians like Salam Remy and later the team behind Back to Black produced an effortless, time-bending sound, old sensuality with new edge. The result was music that sounded classic and very contemporary all at once. That voice, sounded and soulful, paired with modern production, gave Amy songs that were radio ready and heartbreak honest. It's what made Back to Black resonate the way it did. It felt like it belonged to one era and every era simultaneously. Back to Black, released in 2006, was the tidal wave. It stitched together heartbreak, scorn, addiction, and Smoky Baron confession into an album that will go on to sell millions, win trophies, and define a moment in 21st century music. Songs like Rehab, Back to Black, and You Know I'm No Good felt immediate and intimate, slices of life that landed hard with listeners worldwide.
And the Grammy goes to Amy Winehouse.
At the 2008 Grammy Awards, Amy won 5 Grammys, including Record of the Year and Song of the Year for Rehab, as well as Best New Artist and Best Pop Vocal Album. Her success was both critical and commercial. Back to Black would become one of the best-selling albums of its era and secure Amy as a permanent place in music history. But success came with an enormous spotlight, and with that spotlight came scrutiny, tabloids, and a relentless interest in what took place off stage. The personal struggles that her songs sometimes hinted at. Central to the story of Back to Black, and to much of Amy's later turbulence, was her relationship with Blake Fielder Civil. They met in the early 2000s, and their on-again, off-again relationship turned into a marriage in May 2007. Their bond was passionate and chaotic. Many who knew them later said it was codependent and destructive. Filmmakers and critics, notably in the documentary Amy, argued that Blake played a crucial role in Amy's descent into harder substances. He has admitted in interviews that he and Amy experimented with heroin together, and their relationship intensified the downward spiral she fought. Blake's legal troubles and eventual imprisonments only added pressure to an already fracturing life. There's debate about blame and culpability, and while some point to Blake as a destructive force, others point to an industry that failed to protect her, a media machine that fed on her pain, and personal demons she could not outrun. The truth is more complicated than a single villain. It's a knot of codependency, addiction, and structural failure. Amy's problems were not private for long. The tabloid press leaned in, printing pictures of her when she was at her weakest, running lurid headlines and blue-tick gossip that turned struggle into entertainment. Whether it was late-night performances she barely remembered, or photos of her in the street, the media cycle intensified the spotlight on her pain. Some journalists and critics later asked whether the press, and by extension the public appetite for scandal, helped accelerate Amy's collapse. Survivors, friends, and family argued that a kinder approach could have saved energy for help rather than headlines. Amy's life became punctuated by rehab stints, broken promises, and cancelled shows. She entered and left treatment centres, returning to performing, then retreated. Legal problems around Blake, press confrontations, and ever-present camera crews made it nearly impossible for true recovery to take root. She fought fiercely at times, and at others she surrendered to the cycle of relapse, recovery, and relapse again, a pattern tragically common among people battling addiction under global scrutiny. In the late 2000s and in 2010, Amy tried to rebuild. She dated director Reg Travis, was reportedly planning new music, and spoke about wanting to live a quieter life. Friends and supporters hoped she might finally find stability. There were moments when she sounded healthier, and when her voice, even in private studio clips, suggested a return to form. But the road to recovery is rarely linear, and the forces pulling Amy back into addiction were powerful and persistent. On the 23rd of July 2001, Amy Winehouse was found dead at her home in Camden Square. She was 27 years old. The world reacted with shock, grief, and the kind of remorse that often follows the death of somebody hugely talented and tragically self-destructive. Initial toxicology and coroner reports showed that Amy had consumed a large amount of alcohol, and there were no illegal drugs detected in her system at the time of death, according to family statements and the coroner's findings. The coroner ultimately recorded a verdict of death by misadventure, attributing her death to alcohol toxicity after a period of abstinence that made her body less tolerant to heavy drinking. The truth that a single night of binge drinking after a period of sobriety could take her life so young became a cautionary note in a story saturated with what-ifs and could-haves. A second inquest in 2013 confirmed the cause and circumstances around Amy's death, noting that her blood alcohol content was dangerously high, far beyond the legal limit for driving, and that her death was an unintended consequence of voluntary drinking. The inquest findings reinforced the medical explanation and closed a formal chapter in the story. Public grief poured out in Camden and across the world. There were candlelight vigils, tributes for fellow artists, and the painful public reckoning that accompanies every life lost too soon. If you ask what Amy Winehouse left behind, the answer is immediate. Music that still sounds alive, scenes of a young woman whose voice and emotional honesty redefined what pop soul could be in the 2000s. Back to Black remains a touchstone album, a record that influenced artists as diverse as Adele, Bruno Mars, and modern R&B's neo-soul daughters. In 2014, a statue in Camden was unveiled to commemorate her connection to the borough, a city's attempt to honor a complicated daughter. Her music continues to be streamed and discovered by new listeners who arrive without the baggage of tabloid headlines, and often fall in love with the woman who sang like someone older than her years. Beyond the headlines, Amy was a daughter, a friend, and a fiercely talented artist who often sought shelter in music when the world became too loud. Her best songs feel like letters from somebody trying to live through heartbreak, sometimes with grace, sometimes with desperation, but always with the truth. That truth is why so many people still listen. If there's a final note in her life that matters, it's this: the work she left behind matters, and the way we remember her should go beyond scandal and curiosity. Remember the voice, remember the songwriting, remember the human.